Hi students. Well, today we're going to wind up our set of bond videos by looking at a bond that is not paid on December 31. It's paid a different date from December 31 sometime else in the year, and therefore we have to accrue interest and recognize a portion of the discount or premium that is amortized on December 31. And that is again because your interest is a charge for money over time. Some time has passed, and even though it's not due for the cash payment yet, we have to recognize that interest expense in our adjusting journal entries. So let's look at this bond. I've done a lot of the work beforehand this time because you've seen a couple of other videos on bonds at a discount and a premium, and we've built the amortization table together. So here I've gone ahead and done a lot of that already. But just to sort of look at what we have for a bond, the face value of 100,000. We have a coupon rate of 6% with semi-annual payments. Therefore, the payment itself is 100,000 times 6% divided by 2, 3,000. It's a 10-year bond, giving us 20 payments. It's issued May 31, year 1, and the market rate is 7.7%. Now, I use 7.7 to remind you that you cannot round this to one decimal. If we take 7.7 for a year and divide by 2, we get 3.85. And you can't use 3.9 or it won't work. So, if this was 7.73, you would have to take 7.73 divided by 2 and use all of those decimals. So when I plug this into my financial calculator here with these inputs, we get the present value or issue price of the bond. Now moving across a little bit, we have the bond amortization table, starting with our beginning issue price. The payments are all $3,000. And then, of course, just as we did before, we take the carrying amount times the interest rate, 3.85%, and we calculate the interest. And then that gives us the difference between the two, $399, and notice that increases the bond price. This bond is a discounted bond. We need to increase it to $100,000 so that in 20 interest periods we can pay it off. So let's go ahead and do our first standard journal entry, debit cash and credit bonds payable. So there's our first entry to issue the bond. Now the second entry is also fairly simple. Notice the second entry is 6 months later and it does not span a year end. Therefore, just as we did in the other videos in the textbook examples, we're going to do a journal entry for our interest expense. Now here's our numbers from that line in the table. So here's our interest expense, our payment, and the amount of discount we're amortizing. So I've done this journal entry for us. And you should recognize this entry now. Here's our debit to interest expense, our credit to bonds payable, and that increases the bond on its way to 100,000. And here's the credit to cash. Now, the tricky part is the interest accrual. You'll notice that there is 1 month between November 30 and the end of December. Now, in reality, there are 31 days. I'm not going to count days. If you were doing this in a corporate setting, you would probably just count the days. You wouldn't round it off. But for school purposes, we can call that 1 month. So the question is, how much interest do we owe on December 31? And the answer is we owe 1 month of interest, but we're not paying it. We don't pay that until May, even though we owe it. So let's see how much that is. And this is the tricky part. One, I guess the first part's easy. We're going to take the carrying value, which is our 88,692.55, and I wrote it down, keyed it in down here. We're going to multiply it by 3.85%. And remember, that is the interest rate for 6 months, not 12. So it is 1 month out of 6, not 1 month out of 12, as you would do for maybe a note payable or a lease. So carrying value times interest rate times 1 month out of 6 gives interest expense $569.11. So I rounded that off, and here's our interest expense, December 31. So here's the interesting thing. Your interest payable is not the same amount. Your interest payable is based on the amount of money you pay as a payment, and you pay $3,000 every 6 months. So $3,000 times 1/6 is actually $500. So your interest payable isn't $569, it's $500. And the difference between those two numbers is the amount of bond discount that we're going to amortize for that 1 month period. So that $69 credit increases our bonds payable balance by that amount. And this is the standard adjusting entry for accrual of interest for your bond. Now, what I'd like to point out is that you're going to do this entry, like if you work there for 10 years, you're going to do this entry for the journal entries every year for 10 years. These account titles are not going to change every December 31. These are the account titles. What's going to change every December 31 is the amount. And that's because, as you can see, as the bond gets bigger and bigger and bigger, moving towards $100,000, the carrying value times the 3.85% interest rate is going to be a larger number. So every December 31, this number will be different, this number will be different, but your interest payable is a constant at $500 because you pay $3,000 every 6 months. 1/6 of that remains $500. So this will always be $500. So we've done our December 31 interest accrual. Now, on May 31, year 2, we kind of have to clean it up. We have to recognize the rest of the interest, and we have to pay off that interest payable. So I put in a couple of numbers here that should come easily to us. One, our interest payable is $500. That's a credit, it's a liability. I'm going to debit interest payable and debit $500, and that way we paid off our $500. So that was easy. Your cash payment on the bond is $3,000. So that was easy. Like, what's left? Well, we have to record the rest of the interest for the 6-month period. So we've done 1 month, we need to record the other 5 months from December 31 to May 31. And then we have to record the remainder of the bonds payable for that same period of time. So let's just look at what those numbers are. If I go to my amortization table, the interest for that full period is $34.14.66. Now, we already recognized $569.11. So what we need to do is recognize the other 5 months worth. So let's figure out what that is. There, it's $28.45.55. So our interest expense for just the 5 months is this number here. Now, if we were really confident, we could add these two numbers, subtract 3,000, and get our bonds payable credit. And then we could check. So let's just check first. I'm going to look at our difference, and it's going to be this number, 414.66. We're looking at the next 6-month period. And how much did we already use? Well, what we did, notice we already credited bonds payable with 69. So the 414 is the discount amortized for the full 6 months. The 69 is what we already recorded. So we're gonna actually subtract those two and find out 5 months worth. Okay, there it is, 345.55. Now I'm just gonna, those are rounded off. So because I lost a tiny little dollar. No, that's right, 346. Okay, so here we have your May 31 journal entry. This is the other 5 months interest and the other 5 months of discount amortized. Okay, do these journal entries work? Let's find out. $33.46, and these add up to $33.46. Debits equal credits, always a good sign. Okay, so that looks at an interest accrual at December 31. All of these account titles are going to be the same. So every December 31 and every May 31, we're going to have the same account title. The November 30 payment is a standard payment. We just take the line from our amortization table. So November 30 year 2, if we have a look here, here's November 30 year 2. And if I can just get this line to show, 34.31 in interest and 431 credit to bonds payable, and pay your $3,000, right? So you can see that the November entry is standard every time. But along comes another year and we have to accrue interest once again on December 31 and then calculate the other 5 months again the next May 31. So this that you have in front of you, here we have the same account titles that we're going to be using every time, but we need the new numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you figure that out, because we have an example here. I'm going to leave this video on the amortization table, and given the amortization table, given this method, and here's your account titles, you can continue this, and of course you could keep going for the whole 10 years of the bond. It's the same exact method that we did before, except we're using, a different carrying amount. We're using the carrying amount from November 30 year 2. So same calculation, except this number here becomes 89,537 and change. Okay, so that's a look at accruing interest on a bond when the payment dates are not exactly December 31.